Hey there! In this episode of Back to the Basics, we're going to talk about fat quarters. What is a fat quarter? Or more importantly, what is not a fat quarter? So my friend Sue recently bought a fat quarter bundle, kind of like this one, and it very clearly stated on the label that it was 18 by 22 inches. She needed 21-inch strips for her project, so she figured she was good. Except she wasn't. So she contacted me and she's like, what's up with the fat quarters? If you want to know what I told her, stick around. Hi, I'm Terry Santra and I'm the head moose at Purple Moose Designs. Now my friend Sue is a very accomplished quilter. She's also a very prolific quilter, so she knows her way around a quilting project. So when she came up short, she was understandably a little upset. So I guess we should start off with what is a fat quarter. If you're new to quilting and you've heard of them but you're not quite sure what it is, imagine this rectangle is a 1-yard piece of fabric. If you ask for a 1/4 of a yard, you'll get this long skinny piece that'll be 9 inches wide by the width of the fabric. So a fat quarter, they just cut it a little bit differently, the same 1-yard piece of fabric. And what you end up with is a piece that's 18 inches wide by half of the width of the fabric. And that brings us to our first issue. What is the width of the fabric? Well, that can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and it can even vary within the same lines, within lines from the same manufacturer. It all depends on what fabric printer that they're using. They're the ones that determine what the width of the fabric is, and they're all slightly a little bit different. So the ones that are advertised as 18 by 22, then it should be 44 inches wide as the width of the fabric. But things can change. The fabric printers may change some parameters a little bit. Maybe the fabric manufacturers don't realize there's been changes and they haven't updated their labels or whatever. The second issue comes with the cutting of the fat quarters. Now, if fabric is cut by the manufacturer, they usually have these printed ribbons holding the bundles together. And that tells you that this was either cut by the manufacturer themselves, or some of them will send these out to a third-party company that will cut their pre-cuts for them. Now these people are cutting thousands and thousands and thousands of fat quarters at a time. And the way they do that is they have very long tables and they will unroll an entire bolt of fabric. And then they'll unroll another one and another and another and another until the stack is quite thick. And then depending on how big of an operation it is, they either have these big saws that kind of look like a bandsaw almost in a wood shop, and they'll cut them that way. They also have handheld ones that are industrial cutters that they can run through a big stack of fabric all at once. Now, either of those scenarios, it requires a person to actually do the cutting. So of course, there's always a chance for human error. Now, if you're buying some that have been bundled by a quilt shop, either online or brick and mortar. So I bought this one at a quilt shop. So these were cut in the shop itself using trusty rotary cutter, more than likely. Now I took this one apart, and all the fat quarters in here measure anywhere from barely 18 inches to 19 and a half, and everywhere in between. So your ruler can slip, your cutter can slip. You can get a little tired after the first couple hundred fat quarters, and you can make some errors. So again, it's just human error. So even if it's cut perfectly at 18 inches wide by the standard 22 inches, half of the width of the fabric, well, there's still, you end up with this. So this is 2 fat quarters. This was a 1/2 yard piece of fabric. then you have the salvage to deal with, and that's the third issue. Now, one side's going to have a wide area. It'll have all the printed information. Sometimes they'll have the little dots that'll have the colors on there. Well, you can't use that in your quilt. I mean, you don't want this white stripe showing up in the middle of your project when you want the pink. Now, the other side won't have the printed information, but it still has the little pin dots on here. And sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, the weave is a tighter weave on the salvage part. So you don't want to use that in your quilt either. So you need to cut that off. Well, if this was 18 by 22 and you have to cut off at least a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch, then it's not 22 anymore. And if it was cut a little bit short to begin with, then my friend Sue isn't going to get her 21-inch pieces. So for me, when I'm cutting, I cut about 10 or 12 layers at a time. I stack them all up. I cut my 18-inch pieces. And then what I'm left with is half-yard pieces. And I have to get rid of this fold that's on here. Now I could take my scissors, slip it in there and cut through. But when I have hundreds to do, that's just not going to happen. So I use my rotary cutter. I place my ruler on top of the stack and I cut off the tiniest little sliver just to get rid of that fold. And what I end up with is these little ribbons. Well, if the person doing it that way gets a little overzealous and they make bigger ribbons, then that's taking away from your 22-inch piece. Again, a little bit of human error. And then the last issue is if you pre-wash your fabrics, there could be some shrinkage, so you're going to end up with a piece that's a little bit smaller than what you started with. So those are the concerns that can affect the size of the fat quarter you have. So why do fabric companies keep advertising that their pieces are 18 by 22 when you can't get a 22-inch usable piece out of this piece of fabric? Well, I have a couple theories on that. One is I think some of the fabric companies don't have people in their management that are quilters and sewers, so they don't fully understand how we're actually using their product, so they don't realize that it's a problem. Or maybe they just don't care. I don't know. So what's a poor quilter to do? Well, if you're buying your fat quarters in a shop and you're working on a project that has a very tight margin of error for what you need to get out of that fat quarter, ask them if you're going to open it up and measure it and make sure that it's what it's supposed to be. If it's not, get another one of the bundles, open that up and see if that one's a little bit better. If you're buying it online, like my friend Sue did with hers, and it comes and it's not as advertised, hers weren't 18 by 22, even though that's what the label said, then you need to complain to the company that you bought it from, as well as complain to the fabric manufacturer. If we complain about it enough, maybe they'll change their practices. Now, I know my friend Sue did both of those. She complained to the manufacturer as well as the company that she bought it from. And last I heard, she still hadn't heard back. So she's out of luck. She's got to buy more fabric. So there you have it. That's the skinny on fat quarters. Or not, because they're fat. They're not skinny. Whatever. Thanks for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.